As far back as I can remember, there's been a locked safe at the foot of my father's bed. Whenever I'd ask him about it, he would always reply with the same 3 words in due time. Naturally, being a little kid, I still fantasized and dreamed about what could be locked inside of the safe. Maybe a large sum of money he would give me on my 18th birthday. Some sort of secret weapon he would give me in order to defeat an ancient entity that could only be pierced by the blade. A map that would lead me to treasure beyond my wildest dream. Over time, my interest in the old safe eventually ebbed away, and rather than my heart leaping every time I walked by it, I began to just see it as another piece of my dad's room. I guess it just got to the point that I figured my father would never show me what was inside of it. Well, that's what I'd figured. This morning, I woke up dead tired. I always did on school days, since I usually stay up until early hours in the morning working on my studies. I dragged myself out of bed, my blankets grasping onto my legs like they were attempting to keep me asleep. I kicked them loose and scurried to get myself together, hoping to get myself together enough to at least make it to class. The morning went fairly routine: shower, get dressed, eat, brush teeth, etc. Right before I leave every day, I slap a caffeine patch onto my arm, just to give me enough energy to start the day. I tried coffee, but I hated the taste, and I take pride in my pearly white teeth. School was about the same as always: uninterested teachers talking about even more uninteresting topics for nearly 8 hours. It was like a chore. Nobody likes doing it, but it is to get done. By the end of the day I felt as if someone had stuck a tube into the back of my head and filled my head with fog. When the final bell rang, I immediately bolted out of the room and headed towards the exit. My dad always made a point of being the first person in the line to pick me up. He said that it was a waste of time otherwise. He was always like that, talking about efficiency and pretty much nothing else. Sure enough, when I reached the front of the school, there he was, at the very head of the line, waiting with his left hand on the wheel while his right hand dangled off of the end of the armrest. His graying hair was matted to his forehead behind his sunglasses, probably from a long work day. I climbed inside, throwing my backpack into the back seat, on top of my dad's tool bag. "Hey, Dad," I said, pulling my buckle across my chest and clipping it into its latch. He didn't respond, and instead put the truck into drive and started forward towards the road. I didn't say anything else, but I took note of it. Usually, I can't get my dad to shut up, so this was very unusual. We drove in silence for about 5 minutes, when he decided to finally break the silence. "Mike," he said solemnly. I raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" "Look, bud, your mother and I have been talking. They are getting a divorce." I thought, my heart racing in my chest. They are getting divorced. Why didn't I see it coming? This is my fault, isn't it? And we both agreed that it was about time that you saw what was in that old safe. Oh, My heart quickly returned to normal pace and my breathing normalized momentarily after I realized what he'd said. Oh, cool. I said, readjusting myself in my seat. Honestly, I'd forgotten about that old box. I'm excited to see what's in it, though. His face remained stoic, his eyes fixated on the road ahead. Again, I didn't bring it up, but I made a notation of it in my head. We spent the rest of the ride home in silence. When we arrived, my dad immediately beckoned for me to come into his room, so I followed. My dad bent down in front of the bed, glancing down at the safe with dread. "Help me pull this out," he said. "My back can't do what it used to." Sure, I said, rushing forward to help him pull out the box. It wasn't incredibly large or anything. It was maybe 2 feet in each dimension. My dad bent over and pulled a small silver key from his back pocket, inserting it into the safe and turning the key. After that, he began to twist the padlock attached to the front of it until the lock clicked and he swiftly pulled it off. The door of the safe creaked as it opened, presumably because it hadn't been opened for nearly 2 decades. I strained my neck a bit trying to see inside over his hunched figure, However, it was blocked out by his torso. He reached inside and grabbed something, then slowly stood and turned to me. In his hands was a book, an incredibly thick book with dozens of pages sitting askew, an incredibly faded label on the front that appeared to read "For my son." I furrowed my brow in confusion. "What's that?" I asked, as he passed the book into my hands. "You'll see. I suggest you lock yourself into your room whenever you read that. I don't want anyone else seeing you with it." I raised my eyebrow, dusting off the front cover. "Why's that? What's in it?" He shook his head. "Please, just read it. Talk to me when you're done." With that, he pushed past me. I heard the door slam shut as he went into the backyard, presumably to smoke. I shrugged, tucked the book under my arm, and headed back into my room. Once in my room, I locked the door and plopped down onto my bed. Why did my dad wait so long to give this to me? It just seemed like an old scrapbook or something. It was incredibly worn, and was made out of something incredibly strange. It was very rubbery and pure black. Tiny hexagons were etched into the surface, and it felt very thin. The pages, I noticed, were also very strange. They were like very thin, rough pieces of semi-transparent plastic. Leafing through them, I felt as if I was going to rip them simply from that action. Surprisingly, though, whenever I actually tried to tear a corner off of one of the pages, it bent rather than tearing. Sighing, I opened the book to the first page and began reading. First and foremost, I wanted to apologize for not being there to tell you this myself. I am, however, quite certain that by the time you read this, both your mother and I will already be dead. I wanted to let you know that we both love you, and I'm sure we'd both be glad to see the person you've become with Diane and Maurice. My heart leapt into my throat. What the hell is this? I thought to myself. Am I adopted or something? Secondly, I don't want you to resent Maurice for waiting so long to show this to you. He's only following my orders. He's only showing you now so you can be aware and keep yourself safe from here on out. I suppose I should just start from the beginning, shouldn't I? This may be a bit to taking, so make sure you're ready. I adjusted myself on the bed, laying down and reading the book with my head over the pages. I was born on a planet far from Earth on the very edge of the solar system, as a matter of fact. My people age much slower than yours do, so I approximate that in Earth time units I'm about 4,000 years old. Not including the years I spent in stasis, but I'm getting ahead of myself. When I was about 3,000, our planet was struck by a massive meteor. Bigger even than the one that hit the Earth in the Cretaceous era. It split the planet completely in two, sending debris of our own cities bouncing across the stars. The two largest masses began to orbit each other, remaining in basically the same revolutionary pattern around the Sun. Most of the populations of both planets died from the sheer impact of the meteor hitting the planet. The remaining people were quick to point fingers, each side claiming that the other had struck with some sort of amazing weapon capable of annihilating entire species. And thus, a war broke out. I can't even tell you how many of us laid broken and bloodied on the ground of our planet because of the war. There were certainly too many to count. My side, we called ourselves the Glacians, retreated underground, fearing death from the great weapon we believed they had. They, on the other hand, had a quite better fortune than us. Sometime during this period of hiding, of which I believe to be around 300 years, the other side was invaded by parasites from the stars. A very tiny white blob, barely considered life, was found leaching off of the minerals left on the outside of an asteroid that had crashed onto the surface. Upon receiving this news from our spies, those from the other side who still believed we were in the right, we began to celebrate. We thought it was the end of our rival people the Tropians. However, we couldn't have been more wrong. They began to test with the organism and use it to their advantage. It turned out that this creature had the ability to replicate any organism it came into contact with. Within a century, the Tropians had begun to splice the DNA of the organism with their own children's. It gave their people the ability to change their shape at will, and therefore would allow them to disguise themselves as anyone or anything of a given mass. Within only a few hundred years after that, the Tropians gained the ability to travel space efficiently. This meant that they could very easily just fly onto our side of the planet and wipe us all out. Our people, instead of developing our technology, stayed underground, fearing the technical prowess of the Tropians. By the time I was about 4,000, the Tropians had already figured out efficient space travel to different planets within the solar system. At this point, I became involved with a secret government party set on ending the war with the Tropians. You see, very soon after the Tropians began mass-producing these space vessels, one of our own soldiers managed to steal one and deliver it to our government. Our plan was to scout out a planet within reach that we could evacuate the entire planet onto, effectively escaping the Tropians and ending the everlasting feud. I, out of the thousands that populated our planet, was chosen to be on the team to scope out and inspect the only planet we knew of with capacity. Ah! I shouted, feeling a rapid vibration beneath my leg. I quickly yanked my phone out of my pocket, glancing at the screen. Just an email notification. I sighed, locking it and sitting down on the bed beside the book. To maintain life Earth. The team consisted of me with 3 others: Jenxer, the biologist, Kelxer, the pilot, Gentler, the commander, and me, the mechanic. We set off in secret, climbing onto the spacecraft and launching within the hour. Initially, I was very quiet. We were hurtling through space at about 1,000 miles a second. That baffled me to the point of silence. We should arrive in Earth's atmosphere within 52 days, Kelxer said. Given we have to maneuver around anything unexpectedly. I raised an eyebrow. Shouldn't we be able to tell going in whether or not we'll encounter anything? I asked. Aren't there calculations for these sorts of things? Kelxer shook his head. There may be, but we don't know them, said Gentler. Remember, this is kind of a last resort mission. Which is why it's important, she said, staring pointedly at Kelxer. That we don't muck it up. Kelxer rolled his eyes. Whether or not we arrive is about all I have control over. Whether or not the planet will be suitable to our needs is another matter entirely. It should be, piped Jenxer. According to the Tropians' logs, it's absolutely thriving in terms of life. More species than even they can document. I've read the logs, Gentler snapped. But the atmosphere is comprised of completely different compounds than what we breathe. I worry that we may not even be able to live on the surface. We have the stasis pods for a reason, refuted Jenxer. They're meant to adjust us to the atmosphere and adapt our bodies to breathe their air. It's brilliant, really. Yeah, let's just keep complimenting the enemy, why don't we? Sneered Gentler. Silence fell over the crew. After a moment, Jenxer piped up again. Hey, Stender? I think that there should be a stash of informational logs in the cargo area. Could you grab a few for me? I just want to get some more information on Earth before we arrive. She fidgeted in her seat. Plus, it's a good pastime. I shrugged. Might as well. I'll be right back. I quickly squirmed through the far too thin hallway down towards the stairwell and practically fell down the stairs in order to reach the bottom. The Tropians had much smaller feet than we did, and thus the stairs were far too small for me. I opened the door to the cargo bay, then shoved the key into my back pocket. The cargo bay was pitch black, and all I could see were the silhouettes of the boxes and strewn about supplies in the dark. Fumbling around for a light, I tripped on a small crate on the ground and stumbled, trying to regain my steps. As I attempted to stand up, a very cold and solid object stuck into the back of my neck, sending a cold sensation running down my spine. What did they send you down here for? Hissed a female voice, directly beside my ear. My legs went weak and my blood went cold. Some Tropian spy had snuck into the cargo bay, and now she was behind me, holding an injector up to my neck. Answer me, damn it. She spat, jabbing the injector deeper into the back of my neck. Logs, I whispered. Logs about Earth. I felt the pressure lift from my neck and I heard her scurrying behind me. Try as I might, I couldn't move. She had injected me with some sort of neurotoxin that had frozen me in place, apparently. "You'll find that you can talk, but I wouldn't recommend it," she whispered, shuffling through the earth logs. "Because if you call out for help, I'll do what I have to, if you get my meaning." I did. "Ha!" she said. I saw her silhouette drift in front of me, her pointed spikes nearly scratching the ceiling of the cargo bay. "Got it," she said, waving the logs in front of my face. I watched in abject horror as her body began to shift into my own, her head spikes flattening on the tops and becoming utterly more square as her entire upper body became more broad and her arms became more muscular. "Excellent," she said, her voice sounding exactly like mine. "Where's your key?" she asked, prodding the injector at my chest. "Back pocket," I grumbled. I felt her rummage in my pocket for a bit before pulling out the shiny hunk of metal. "Thank you, darling," she said, kissing my cheek. "Man," she said. "That's gotta feel weird. Getting kissed by yourself. Wonder what that's like." She shrugged, leaving through the door and locking it behind her. A million thoughts were racing through my head. Why was she on here? How did she get on here? Is she going to sabotage the mission? Why hasn't she killed me yet? I couldn't really do anything but think about this, given that I couldn't move on the account of me being paralyzed. I stood this way for hours, my muscles begging to ache and my limbs beginning to fall asleep. I occasionally heard shuffling upstairs, or a loud shout, but it wasn't enough to tell me what was going on. Great, I thought. It's the first day and I'm already a prisoner on my own goddamn ship. After a long while, I couldn't tell quite how long, the lock on the door turned and I watched as my counterpart strolled in, whistling nonchalantly. Once she locked the door behind her, she returned to her original form. "Sorry I had you sitting like that for so long," she said, walking behind me and injecting some warm liquid into my neck. I couldn't quite get away. Slowly but surely, feeling returned into my limbs, and I fell to the floor, limp from how long my muscles had been tensed up. I shot an ice spike directly at her from my hand, but it simply missed her and instead struck a crate behind her, shattering it to bits. "Are you dense?" she whispered through clenched teeth, pointing the injector at me again. "You're gonna breach the ship, and then we're all gonna die." I bore my teeth, but said nothing. I sat back on my elbow, propping myself up. "So," she said. "Tell me about yourself." "Bite me," I retorted. She sighed. "Look, if you want, I could just lock you in here all of the time, just having you live off of the rations in here. I wonder how long you'd last before you lost your noggin, eh?" Again, I didn't respond. "So, just play along," she said, sitting cross-legged in front of me. "Tell me about yourself." I scoffed. "I'm a mechanic," I said, sitting up completely on my rear end. "From the Lower East Quarter, second layer." "Oh, right," she snorted. "Forgot that you guys lived in caves." I shrugged. "You asked." I shuffled in my seat. "What about you?" "Well, I came from Tropias, obviously." She sneered. "I was born in Quadrant 3 - that's on the equator." "I know." She raised an eyebrow. "How'd you know that?" I didn't respond. She shook her head. "We know about your spies, we just don't know who." She gave me a sidelong glance. "Any chance you'd happen to know?" I remained silent, baffled that she actually asked me to betray my people. She scoffed. "I'm kidding, of course. No self-respecting Gleason would give up his comrades from just a little smooth talk."